In 1870, Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, a great fighter for black people's rights, introduced a sweeping bill to grant D.C. residents broad powers just short of statehood. The bill was defeated. When Frederick Douglass moved to Washington, just a little longer, he called Washingtonians a disenfranchised people who suffer under plenty taxation but no representation. John Lewis said pretty much the same 100 years later. It is not right that there is an America where there is taxation without representation in the nation's capital. The DC Statehood Party was founded officially 100 years later in 1970, after Douglas's remarks, by Julius Hobson, Hilda Mason, Josephine Butler, who was a labor organizer, Sam Smith, who was the owner of the DC Gazette, and Lou Aronica, a gardener. Hobson said, and I quote, "A constitutional amendment required a 2/3 vote in Congress and the ratification by 3/4 of the states. But simple statehood, such as Alaska and Hawaii had attained, required only a majority of Congress and a president's signature." Sam Smith, writing in the Washington Post a little time later, said, and I quote, "But there is nothing radical about statehood. It has happened 37 times since the 13 colonies got together. Further, the Constitution goes out of its way to simplify the process. It has been far easier to create new states and permit their residents to vote than it has been to give black people and women the right to vote." The next year, Ron Dellums, Democratic congressman of California, and Fred Swingle, Republican of Iowa, introduced a statehood bill in Congress. Both bills died in committee. The Dellums bill was drafted largely by members of the DC Statehood Party. Senator George McGovern, the Democratic candidate for president, had planned to offer a statehood bill in the Senate until he was convinced by local activists who were not in favor of statehood to put it off. Not long after, John McMillan, the arch conservative, who was the head of the House District Committee, said something that's quite surprising. "The only way you're going to get pure, unadulterated representation in this city is by ceding back to Maryland or through statehood." In 1970, there were about 750,000 people in the city. The next year, President Richard Nixon signed the District of Columbia Delegate Act, which gave Washington a non-voting delegate in Congress. Walter Fontrell was sworn in as the first modern non-voting delegate in 1971. Here lies the rub, as they say. Here lies the difference. Fontrell was always for the Voting Rights Amendment, which meant he was for giving Washington, D.C., one congressman in the congressman with full voting rights. Statehood, however, is something quite different. It gives the people of Washington not only 2 senators and 1 representative based on population, but it gives them control over their own destiny in a bill that passes in its own house. Statehood meant that level of control. Now, soon Ed Guinan, who had been a Paulist priest, found something unique. He saw that in the initiative and recall legislation that Julius Hobson had put forth, there was something that he could use to call for the election of a D.C. Statehood Convention. So what he did was help get on the ballot the D.C. Constitution Initiative of 1979, which meant that the citizens would vote on this, and if it was accepted, they would then call a convention. In November 1980, this was done by a large vote. 45 delegates were elected, 5 from each ward, and 5 at large. They met daily for 90 days, day in, day out, of great debate. There were people of all types. There were taxi cab drivers and lawyers, college professors. There was communists, socialists, statehood party advocates. And they all met in a grueling campaign. In these 90 legislative days, they put forth one of the most profound constitutions, I think, that the Western world has seen, with broad rights. This Constitution was put before the voters in November of 1982, and they accepted it at the polls. The Constitution was then given to the mayor and the city council, but the mayor and the city council decided that they would not accept the Constitution that the citizens had voted for, and therefore a committee was set up based on congressional staffers and members of the city council to alter the bill, and notions that the Constitution could be watered down and therefore would be more passable. But it didn't work. A couple of years before then, in 1978, Congressman Walter Fauntroy had put forth the Voting Rights Amendment in Congress, which would take 8 years if two-thirds of the state legislators accepted it. In 8 years, then it would become the Voting Rights Amendment, and you would have that as the law of the land. But 8 years passed, and they were only 16 states had adopted it. So, at that point, most people saw that the only route was statehood. It was a practical route at that time. In 1987, DC statehood was becoming a national issue. The Seattle Times issued an editorial, and it said, "Why not statehood for the DC citizens? It is only a matter of simple justice. Its population is more than that of Alaska, Delaware, and Wyoming." The Minnesota Star and Tribune editorialized on it. That same year, Jesse Jackson decided that he would come to Washington, so he moved here in 1990. In 1984 and 1988, he had been a Democratic standard bearer for the presidential race, and statehood was put into the platforms of both. In 1990, also, Eleanor Holmes Norton was elected as the DC delegate, the brilliant constitutional lawyer. Now, when Jackson comes to Washington, he is running as a shadow senator, as the DC Constitution called for, 2 shadow senators and 1 representative. The same year, 1990, the New York Times, for the first time, issued an editorial, "The DC Plantation, Freedom Soon," and it ended. "The issue of statehood for the district raises an obvious question. How can we justify championing democracy all over the world when our citizens in Washington, D.C. have second-class citizenship? The answer is simple. We have no answer." The Boston Globe editorialized for statehood. The Oregonian said, "No competing argument against statehood has been advanced, and no alternative has been offered. To continue second-class citizenship for the people of D.C. is offensive with democratic principles. It is unworthy of this republic." For the first time in 1993, the Washington Post editorialized it for statehood, and it said, in comparing D.C. to a colony, something that Julius Hobson had done years before, "We know what they said in 1776 on behalf of a colonist population." And the Post added, "It was only 4 times larger than what D.C. is today. They weren't to be amongst those who governed themselves. So do the citizens of Washington, D.C." Lastly, I'll end with the words of perhaps one of statehood's greatest friends, the late Ted Kennedy, beloved among the people of Washington, D.C. And he said, "For generations, the residents of the District of Columbia have borne the burden and responsibility for citizenship without any rights and privileges. The time has come to remove this unfound cloud of second-class status from the District of Columbia. If not statehood, what? If not now, when?" And he ended, "Many in the national legislative branch oppose self-determination because of the 4 twos. The city is too poor, too urban, too democratic, and too black. How things have changed and how they remain the same." Thank you.